Hello and welcome to the Justice Factor. Should farm workers take ownership of half the land on which they are employed? Minister of Agriculture, Senzeni Zokwana, says these are just proposals on the table and not ANC policy. Minister Zokwana will join us today to discuss these issues and food security in South Africa. After that discussion, we'll give you a winner and loser of the week. Now, on Wednesday, Minister of Finance Nhlanhla Nene will release his first medium-term budget policy statement. To discuss this, I'm joined by Karl of Numsa and Xhanti Payi, Economist at Nascence Research. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Good
Karl,
evening.
let me start with you. I mean, Nhlanhla Nene, these are not happy times globally. This is not a happy time in South Africa. Everyone says the economy is not growing. What do you want to see from him on Wednesday?
Well, I guess the conversation to be had in the country is whether we should not be looking at a completely different economic framework. It appears to us, both in COSATU and generally on the left, that every budget we get annually is steeped still within the framework of GEAR, and we don't think, even in troubled economic times internationally, it's not taking us anywhere.
But that's unlikely to happen, Karl, because the ANC is committed to the National Development Plan, which you've criticized in the past, which seems a lot like GEAR, which seems a lot like, well, a bit of the RDP, but not quite.
Well, our point has substantively been that the economic framework is one in which we're not likely to deal with unemployment, with poverty. In fact, we think that the resolution of poverty, unemployment, and poverty is virtually postponed to 2030, in our view, in the sense that the National Development Program does absolutely nothing with respect to economic ownership and control, and therefore you will continue to see, for example, many of the South African companies listing on the stock exchanges in London, elsewhere in the world, and you will continue seeing an outflow of capital. And in that sense, we may think that we're responding to the agencies that are rating us, we're responding to the World Bank, but we're skipping on the same place, essentially.
Skipping in the same place, Xhanti Payi, do you agree with that? What do you want to see?
Well, I mean, I think that if we look at what they were talking about in the last budget, was some of the things about job creation was at the forefront, particularly for young people. There certainly was a whole point about industrialization and that we should actually be creating industries locally, particularly for black people. So it seemed that there is the kind of language that would be ideologically leftist. But I think one of the issues I found quite interesting was today the Minister of Social Development came out talking about this idea that we have about 16 million people on some kind of social welfare, and we're spending about 100 billion in that. Now, that if you look at that number, it's been growing consistently. And what's interesting is whether or not in the policy making, which is obviously the budget part of it, we are defeating the problem, or we are actually, it keeps growing and growing, which is the problem that we need to do, including some of the work that we're doing in job creation.
So I don't get what you're saying, Xhanti Payi. Are you saying the minister needs to rein in the spending on these 16 million?
No, I'm saying the manner in which we are spending clearly is not reaching the goals. So you don't want to keep growing the number. You want to be able to at least peak at some level and then it starts coming down. Then we know that our social interventions are working.
Can I say to both of you, did you see the employment numbers that came out recently about a month ago? I mean, now the public sector is the fastest growing employment sector. So government is employing, your sector, Numsa, steel and engineering is not employing, no one else is employing. So that expenditure is not going to stop, Xhanti Payi.
Well, then that's the point, that even if we talk about jobs creation, right, that was a so-called jobs fund, and that is very important. We need to stimulate growth, we need to stimulate job creation. But is it the way in which we are doing it working that it actually achieves those ends? And I think that's a debate maybe that the minister needs to try and start pushing now in terms of policy.
Can he do it, given who he is and where he comes from?
You see, it's extremely problematic to personalize.
No, I'm not personalizing. I mean, given where the party that he comes from. Let me just correct that. Given who he comes from, and that's the African National Congress of South Africa, which is for the NDP.
Yes, I think what must end essentially in our country in conversations of economic growth, economic development is left talk, but when you have to act, you do not follow through. Let me make a few examples. One of the things that this country desperately needs is fast-tracking aggressively of industrialization. We continue to see raw minerals leaving our shore. There's a lot of talk about beneficiation, and you can track it down over the last 14 years and more. But we have yet to see how we turn that raw material into value. You go next door to Botswana and you'll see that they've set processes in motion to add that value. You continue to see, for example, on the question of spending, departments are not spending what they get as a budget, including municipalities. If you look at housing, the 2013-2014 figures will tell you that there's a whole host of money that would be sitting somewhere not utilized. How do we then address the question of the necessary service delivery that we must employ?
Okay, let's talk about the big kahuna in the room here, and it's public sector wages. Your comrades in COSATU, in SATU, and other public sector unions have asked for a 15% salary increase for next year, right? Government in 2012 had budgeted 5%, and they got 7%. This is going to cause havoc, Xhanti Payi, to our finances.
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering where the Minister Sisulu before had been talking about getting value for money, getting some efficiencies, and I wonder where that debate went, because I suppose in a sense what you need to do is to be, as much as you are hiring more people, you are getting as much from them as possible, so that at some level the number actually peaks and you're starting to see the benefits. I mean, 15% is quite a high number because it changes the base almost completely. That actually, if you do 15% now, next year you will have, and you do 5% next year, the base is much higher, so 5% over that number becomes much higher and probably unsustainable. That debate is quite important around those ideas around, you give 15%, but what is it that, in terms of the long-term benefit, it is that you get it?
Karl seems to want to give the public sector workers 15%.
Well, essentially, yes. I mean, let me make 2 points. Let's go to the social and welfare grants that our government provides to the indigent and the poorest of the poor. It is below inflation rate. What do you do with getting people out of poverty? That's one. But two, on the public sector workers, it almost seems as if we're starting always on the wrong side. We never get to the top where the high earners are, and the gap between a director general and the lowest paid in the public sector. And if you want to improve buying power, economic buying power, you've got to reject the low wage model.
Xhanti Payi, do you agree with him?
Look, I think something that was quite interesting for me to see last week when the minister spoke, he talked about his problems with the finances, with revenue, and obviously his ability to spend. And he said, maybe we need to postpone some of these projects. And what is interesting is, where do you actually start postponing? Because some of the projects that he has to put in play are needed for economic growth. Those are stimulants.
Xhanti Payi is saying, yes, he's going to give you the 15% that the trade unions are asking for, but all these infrastructure projects, other projects are going to be put on hold, and you'll be complaining that government is not spending the 4 trillion rand on infrastructure that it said it wants to spend in the next 15
Again,
years.
I think government at times follow a completely wrong policy menu and prescripts. For example, on infrastructure, why would we have infrastructure outsourced to China, to Germany, to the US? We'll have to come back at some other point to the Transnet 50 billion rand deal. There's a much to be looked at, because we have capable companies, local manufacturers, that have actually exported locomotives to Taiwan, etc. So it's a question of what policy choices you really make to grow the manufacturing base in the country.
5 minutes. 5 seconds. 5 seconds. Is it same old, or is tomorrow going to be, Wednesday going to be exciting and new?
Well, I mean, I think he's been giving some hints. I think maybe he's going to do something on tax. That might be quite interesting. And probably one of the most important things that he has to do is to try and move even harder on the leakages. Because if you think about it, we still pay interest on the money that leaks.
Xhanti Payi, thanks so much. Cloete, thanks so much for your contribution, both of you. After the break, we ask Minister of Agriculture Senzeni Zokwana why so many South Africans still go to sleep on empty stomachs.